When the first wave of Russian tanks rolled toward Ukraine, few imagined they'd end up as smoldering wrecks scattered across fields and forests. Yet, that's exactly what's happened. Thousands of them. As of mid-October, Ukraine claims to have destroyed more than 11,000 Russian tanks, a number so massive it's hard to wrap your head around. For a long time, Moscow brushed those losses off. The Kremlin's story was simple. Ukraine wasn't taking out the good tanks, just the old Soviet junk Russia no longer cared about. Those outdated models were, supposedly, just there to waste Ukraine's missiles. The real prize, the elite T-90M Pro-Riv tanks, were being saved for something bigger. For nearly a year, Russia kept those shiny new T-90Ms tucked away like a secret weapon. They were supposed to be unstoppable, sleek, powerful, and deadly. Putin himself bragged that the T-90M was the best tank in the world, boasting that nothing could survive once it came into range. Russian state media echoed the same line, hyping the tank's armor, firepower, and speed as proof of Russia's unmatched military technology. The plan, according to defense analyst David Axe, was to use them in a massive assault on Donetsk Oblast, with one goal in mind: take the key city of Pokrovsk, a critical hub that Russia had failed to seize all summer. So, when the T-90Ms finally appeared on the battlefield in early October, Moscow's propaganda machine went silent for a moment, waiting for the big triumph it had promised for months. But instead of glory, what followed was chaos. Within hours, Ukrainian drones and precision artillery turned those invincible tanks into blazing heaps of metal. Videos quickly surfaced online, showing the once-feared T-90Ms being picked off one after another. The same machines Putin had called untouchable were falling apart faster than the older tanks they were meant to replace. What makes this sting even more is how much faith Russia had placed in these machines. The T-90M is built to impress, at least on paper. It's fitted with a 125mm smoothbore gun that can fire both regular shells and guided missiles. It boasts an advanced laser-guided system that supposedly hits targets more than 3 miles away. It's got a machine gun for close-range defense and armor, designed to absorb and deflect explosions. And with a top speed of about 37 miles per hour, it's not exactly sluggish for a 50-ton war machine. On paper, it's the perfect blend of firepower and mobility, something that should have given Russia the edge. But modern warfare isn't fought on paper anymore. Ukraine has spent the last 2 years turning its skies into a digital trap. Using small, low-cost drones and AI-guided targeting systems, Ukrainian forces can spot, track, and destroy tanks before their crews even know they're being hunted. Many of the T-90Ms were taken out by cheap first-person view drones, costing a few $100s each. It's an almost unbelievable imbalance. $1 million tanks falling to makeshift flying bombs made from hobbyist gear and spare parts. Putin's problem boils down to something painfully simple. It's one thing to brag about a weapon's power, and another to see how it actually performs when the shooting starts. The T-90M might look like a beast on paper, but all those high-tech systems mean little when the other side floods the battlefield with a mix of mines, drones, artillery, and portable rocket launchers. Still, Putin seemed convinced he had the perfect weapon for a dramatic comeback. On October 9th, he greenlit a massive armored push near Pokrovsk, a full-blown mechanized assault meant to remind the world that Russia's army was still dangerous. The plan felt like a throwback to old Soviet-style warfare. After months of sending small infantry teams to probe Ukrainian lines, Russia was going big again. According to defense writer David Axe, the target was a small but strategic village called Shakov, about 12 miles north of Pokrovsk. Don't let the size fool you. Shakov wasn't just another dot on the map. It anchored a key section of Ukraine's defense network, sitting right at the edge of a narrow bulge that Russia had managed to carve through Ukrainian territory earlier that summer. If Russia could seize it, they'd gain a foothold to launch even deeper strikes toward Pokrovsk. So, Putin's generals threw everything they had at it. 36 tanks, including several of those prized T-90Ms, armored vehicles, and 40 motorcycle troops. A strange but increasingly common sight in this war. In recent months, Russia has been using motorbikes to zip soldiers across open fields, hoping speed would keep them alive long enough to spot enemy positions. It's a risky move that often ends badly, but Moscow keeps trying. This time was no different. As the Russian columns moved in, Ukraine was already waiting. Shakov wasn't some quiet village caught off guard. It was heavily fortified and manned by Ukraine's 225th Assault Regiment, backed by the battle-hardened 1st Azov Corps. These were units that had spent the summer reclaiming territory nearby and learning exactly how Russia fought. Together, they'd built a layered defense designed to stop whatever rolled their way. When the attack began, it came in waves. Ukrainian soldiers later described it on Telegram. First came the motorcycles, then the armored columns, then the tanks carrying infantry. It was textbook Russian doctrine, a costly one. The idea seemed to be to let the motorcycle troops draw fire first, burning through Ukraine's ammunition before the heavier tanks arrived. But Ukraine had evolved past that kind of bait. The defenders unleashed drones, artillery strikes, and anti-tank mines in a coordinated storm that tore through the advancing columns before they ever reached the village. Within hours, the assault collapsed. 20 Russian vehicles were hit, including several tanks. 3 of them T-90M. Ukraine's artillery finished off 2 lighter vehicles that appeared to be civilian trucks repurposed for combat. That detail might sound shocking, but it's become disturbingly common. According to recent battlefield reports, as much as 90% of Russia's vehicle losses now involve civilian cars or trucks pressed into service because of mounting shortages. Some were covered in scrap metal for armor. Others were barely modified at all. Soldiers were riding into battle with less protection than the tanks behind them. By the end of the day, the fields around Shakov were littered with wreckage, burned-out tanks, overturned bikes, and twisted metal where armored vehicles once stood. For the Russian soldiers caught in that mess, October 9th turned into one of the bloodiest days of the month. When the smoke cleared over Shakov, the numbers painted a grim picture for Moscow. According to the 1st Azov Corps, Russia's losses weren't just heavy, they were catastrophic. Out of the entire assault force, 107 soldiers were killed outright, and another 51 were wounded badly enough to be pulled from the fight. In other words, most of the men sent into that attack never made it back. Defense writer David Axe notes that Russia hasn't confirmed which specific units were involved, but signs point to several of the 5 Marine brigades recently redeployed to Pokrovsk. If that's true, it means the Kremlin threw some of its best-trained fighters, elite Marines, not conscripts, into a battle they had no chance of winning. That's what makes this failure sting even more. These weren't green recruits or hastily mobilized soldiers. These were experienced fighters, equipped with what was supposed to be Russia's best armor, the T-90M ProRiv. And yet, all that training and tech meant nothing when their equipment couldn't live up to the hype. The truth is, Russia's confidence in its tank fleet has long been built on shaky ground. The T-90M's problem isn't that it's a bad design, it's that it's old technology dressed up as new innovation. Even as Russian troops were burning in Shakov's fields, the Kremlin's defense industry was busy bragging about those same tanks back home. In May 2025, just months before the failed assault, Russia's state-run defense giant Rostec proudly announced another shipment of T-90Ms, alongside upgrades to its older T-72B3M and T-80BVM tanks. The company's deputy CEO, Vladimir Archikov, declared that these machines were the best tanks in the world and perfectly suited for modern combat. His words were echoed across Russian media, meant to show strength and reassure the public that everything was under control. But even casual observers noticed the problem. Those older models, the T-72 and T-80, were the same ones that Ukraine had been blowing up by the hundreds since the first weeks of the war. By lumping the T-90M in with its outdated cousins, Rostec may have revealed more than it intended. If the T-72s and T-82s couldn't survive Ukrainian drones, precision artillery, or handheld missile systems, why should anyone believe the T-90M would fare differently? Yet propaganda thrives on appearances. Russia needs its people and the world to believe it still leads the way in tank warfare. Photos of shiny new machines rolling off factory floors make for great headlines. But out on the battlefield where drones hunt from above and laser-guided shells strike with terrifying accuracy, those world's best tanks are just targets waiting their turn. And while the T-90M isn't technically ancient, it first rolled off production lines in 1994, that still makes it a child of another era. Back then, tanks were built for massive ground battles between armies, not the drone-swatting, satellite-tracked warfare of today. In fact, as analysts have pointed out, the T-90M barely saw any real combat until Putin invaded Ukraine. For 30 years, it lived mostly on display, polished for parades, promoted in arms expos, and paraded as proof of Russian might. Only when it finally met the chaos of modern war did everyone see the truth. Its legend was built for a world that no longer exists. At this point, what Russia really has in Ukraine isn't a super tank at all. It's a machine being tested live in one of the most brutal combat labs on Earth, and it's failing that test in every imaginable way. Each new deployment of the T-90M feels less like a show of strength and more like an experiment in how quickly modern warfare can expose old ideas. Before Ukraine, the T-90M had barely tasted battle. One of the only times it saw real action was way back in 2015, when Russia sent a few to Syria to back the Assad regime. Out of the 6 tanks delivered, one reportedly survived several hits from American-made BGM-71 TOW missiles, a weapon first introduced in the 1970s. That narrow survival was enough to make Moscow puff its chest out. If the tank could withstand missiles that old, surely it could handle anything newer, right? But that's like bragging your car survived a crash test using 1970s seatbelts. It doesn't prove much in today's world. Fast forward to Ukraine, and the T-90M has met its match. The battlefield here isn't just full of anti-tank missiles. It's crawling with drones, electronic jammers, and cheap explosive quadcopters that cost less than a laptop. Against that kind of swarm, the T-90M's armor and sensors might as well be made of tin. The weak points that Ukraine keeps exploiting aren't accidents. They're leftovers from Soviet-era design philosophy that valued mass production over crew safety. One of the biggest flaws is the same deadly mistake that haunted its ancestor, the T-72. In both tanks, there's no partition separating the crew from the ammo. Instead, shells are stored in a rotating carousel beneath the turret, right next to where the soldiers sit. It saves space, but it also means one lucky hit can turn the whole thing into a fireball. Modern Western tanks like the US Abrams or Germany's Leopard 2 solved this decades ago by adding armored blast doors that protect the crew when ammo ignites. The T-90M never got that upgrade. So when Ukraine strikes from above, using Javelin missiles or FPV drones that attack the tank's roof, it's game over. The explosion doesn't just disable the vehicle, it vaporizes everyone inside. And that's just the start. The T-90M has another bizarre issue, something military observers now jokingly call spinning turret syndrome. First spotted by Forbes back in 2022, it happens when the tank takes a hit in just the wrong place. Instead of locking down or stabilizing, the turret suddenly starts spinning uncontrollably, like a broken carnival ride. Videos have captured it happening multiple times, including one instance in May 2024, when a Ukrainian drone hit a T-90M twice in quick succession. After the second strike, the turret began rotating clockwise on its own. The crew panicked, jumped out, and ran. The tank was still alive, but completely useless, its main gun unable to aim or fire properly. If you've made it this far into the video, it means you're enjoying what we do here at Euro Bulletin. Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more updates and insights from Europe and its partners. Let's dive in more. Imagine it. A vehicle touted as the best tank in the world, unable to stop itself from spinning in circles after a hit. It's almost darkly comic, except for the soldiers trapped inside when it happens. These are not minor bugs or one-off malfunctions. They're fundamental design flaws that should have been solved decades ago. The fact that they still exist shows how little Russia's tank engineering has evolved since the Cold War. And yet, the Kremlin keeps insisting that these machines represent the peak of modern warfare. The reality playing out in Ukraine tells a much different story. A story of overconfidence, shortcuts, and technology that simply can't keep up with the way wars are being fought now. The truth is, Russia never even thought to look for the kind of weakness that keeps crippling its T-90Ms. Because back when the tank was designed, nobody imagined warfare would look like this. When it entered production in 1994, drones were toys, not weapons. The idea that small buzzing machines could hover miles away and drop explosives through a tank's weak spots wasn't even science fiction yet. So, of course, the engineers who built the T-90M didn't plan for it. How could they? That's the real problem. The T-90M isn't the cutting-edge monster Moscow pretends it is. It's a modern paint job on an old Soviet design. The same flaws that doomed its predecessors have simply been carried forward, wrapped in new armor, and given a fancier name. According to the national interest, that's exactly what's killing the T-90M in Ukraine. The magazine notes that new threats have rendered obsolete many of the tank's defenses, especially its Shtora protection system, once hailed as a breakthrough in tank survivability. But now, systems like Shtora can't stop the loitering munitions, top attack missiles, or smart drones dominating today's battlefields. Weapons like the US-made Javelin and Ukraine's own fleet of FPV drones are making a mockery of Russia's so-called best tank. On October 9th, Ukraine showed the world just how badly those old defenses crumble under pressure. The combination of drones, mines, and precision artillery wiped out Russia's T-90MS as easily as the rusted relics they were supposed to replace. What was meant to be a turning point in the battle for Pokrovsk ended up proving that the tank's legendary status was nothing more than wishful thinking. And yet, rather than scrap the idea, Russia is doubling down. You'd think that after so many failures, the Kremlin would quietly shelve the T-90M. But no, Moscow's doing the opposite. Reports from United 24 Media in June revealed that Russia has been massively ramping up production. The conflict intelligence team estimated that between 280 and 300 T-90Ms were built in 2024, up from roughly 140 to 180 the year before, and just 60 to 70 back in 2022. On paper, that sounds impressive, like the gears of a wartime economy finally turning. But when you compare that number to reality, it falls apart. Ukraine claims to have destroyed over 11,000 Russian tanks since the full-scale invasion began, roughly 3,000 per year. So even if Russia builds 300 new T-90Ms annually, it's replacing only a tenth of what it's losing. It's like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teacup. Each new T-90M that rolls off the line barely has time to leave the factory before it's being hunted down by Ukrainian drones or precision artillery. So why keep building them? Analysts think Russia might be stockpiling, either to rebuild its depleted forces or to prepare for the day when it can sell these tanks abroad again. Before the war, countries like India, Algeria, and Vietnam were interested buyers of Russian armor. That export market has dried up under sanctions, but the Kremlin may be playing the long game, filling its warehouses in case it needs to restart the sales pitch once the dust settles. And maybe that's the irony of it all. The same T-90Ms that burned outside Shakov could have come straight from the stockpiles Russia is desperately trying to preserve. The Kremlin may have pulled them from storage not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. After losing thousands of tanks and failing to take Pokrovsk all summer, Putin's army simply ran out of options and out of time. If there's one thing that seems certain now, it's this. Russia is going to have a tough time convincing anyone to buy the T-90M after Ukraine. In truth, that struggle started long before the first Russian tank ever crossed the border. Back in 2019, Moscow thought it had landed a major victory when India, one of its biggest defense customers, agreed to purchase 469 T-90Ms in a deal worth roughly $2 billion. That broke down to more than $4 million per tank, a huge payday for Russia's arms industry and a potential lifeline for its economy. For the Kremlin, the math made perfect sense. If it could keep producing 280 to 300 tanks a year, the profits might help offset the billions Putin was burning through in Ukraine. But India's experience with the T-90 wasn't what Russia had promised. By 2020, reports were already surfacing about serious performance problems. During an international tank biathlon, a sort of military Olympics for armored vehicles, India's T-90s sputtered and failed mid-competition, forcing the team out of the running. The embarrassing malfunctions weren't just bad optics. They raised real doubts about whether the tank could function reliably in extreme conditions. By 2024, India's patience had run out. According to the National Interest, Indian engineers had begun rebuilding their T-90 fleet from the ground up, redesigning critical systems to make the tanks actually usable in modern warfare. In other words, one of Russia's most loyal weapons customers had decided it could do a better job fixing the T-90 than Russia could building it. That tells you everything you need to know about the tank's reputation. The T-90M was already being questioned years before Ukraine exposed its flaws on a global stage. And then came October 9th, the day Ukraine shattered what was left of that reputation. The same tank Russia had once paraded as unstoppable was torn apart in a single failed assault near Pokrovsk. Ukraine's drones, mines, and artillery didn't just stop Russia's advance, they erased it. The entire operation collapsed in less than a day, leaving behind smoking wrecks that once symbolized Russian military pride. Still, Putin's army will keep dragging more T-90Ms from storage, convinced that sheer quantity can make up for quality. But Ukraine will keep hunting them down, each one faster than the last. What was once hailed as the world's best tank is quickly becoming little more than a cautionary tale in real time, an expensive reminder of how technology that refuses to evolve is doomed to repeat its failures. And the T-90M? It's just the beginning. Because as the cracks spread through Russia's war machine, it's becoming clear that Putin's biggest problems go far beyond one tank that couldn't live up to its name. So where does all of this leave Russia? How long can a country keep pouring money and men into a machine that no longer works the way it was meant to? Can Moscow's factories really churn out enough new tanks to matter when every advance meets a drone swarm instead of a battlefield? And if even the world's best tank can't survive a modern war, what does that say about the rest of Russia's arsenal? Could this be the moment when the myth of Russian military power finally unravels for good? Or will Putin find some new trick to keep it alive? As Ukraine keeps rewriting the rules of warfare with cheap drones and smart weapons, one can't help but wonder, what happens when the old giants of war realize that brute strength no longer decides the outcome of a fight?